I want to bring in MS Now's Laura Barone-Lopez covering the White House. Jeff Mason is White House correspondent for Bloomberg. And Max Boot is senior fellow for national security studies at the Council on Foreign Relations and a Washington Post columnist. Great to have all of you there. Jeff, I understand you just got off the phone with President Trump. What did he tell you?
I did. He said a couple things, Chris. Number one, he said that he was in no rush to get a deal. And he talked in the context of that about how long the wars in Vietnam and Afghanistan and Korea had gone. So that was some context for him saying that he was not in a rush to get what he considered a potentially bad deal. He also, I asked him about the ceasefire. He said he was unlikely to extend the ceasefire. And so both of those things, I think, are signals that are a little bit different from the signals he was sending last week about wanting to get a deal quickly and anticipating that it would happen soon. He did say that he thought the talks could go well for all sides. So there was some optimism in our conversation. But in general, he sort of leaned into the fact that he doesn't want to be pushed into a deal if it's not good or it's not one that he feels comfortable with, and that he's not going to lift the ceasefire from what he said was a Wednesday evening deadline.
Max, what are we supposed to make of all this? First, it was 4 to 6 weeks. Then he's saying that, he thinks we're about done with this war on multiple occasions, including at the end of last week. And now I'm in no rush to get a deal. After telling the American people that, don't worry, that once this is all over, gas prices will come down. Where does that leave us, Max?
I think President Trump is very confused, and therefore his messaging is very confused. But I would discount whatever he says about not needing to get a deal, comparing this to the length of, the Vietnam War, World War II. I mean, heaven forbid this lasts for years. That's the last thing anybody, including President Trump, wants. He's obviously desperate for a deal. That's why he sent Vice President Vance and his negotiating team to Islamabad, even before there was any assurance that the Iranians were going to reciprocate and send a team of their own. It's evident that he's blundered into this war that he thought would be over very quickly, and he needs to find a way out. And so far, he's not doing it with this bluster. In fact, what I think you're seeing now is that the blockade that he is enforcing against Iran is to some extent backfiring. I think it's possible that last week, Iran might have opened up the Strait of Hormuz if Trump had reciprocated by lifting the U.S. blockade. Instead, he doubled down. And so my very modest suggestion, which I make in a new piece on the Council on Foreign Relations website, is instead of trying to resolve all the outstanding issues between the U.S. and Iran, of which there are decades worth, and they're not going to be resolved in another meeting, one meeting in Islamabad, I think the way forward is an open for open deal where we agree to lift our blockade of Iran, and in return, Iran agrees to lift their blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and get global commerce flowing, which is going to be in Iran's interest, it's going to be in our interest, it's going to be in the world's interest, and then that'll buy some time to try to hash out a deal on the nuclear issue and others that are not going to be susceptible to a speedy resolution.
Yeah, a nuclear deal, Jeff, as decades have shown us, is a complicated thing. What you would think would be less complicated was who was going to go and have these talks representing the U.S. The president caused confusion over the weekend about whether J.D. Vance was going to participate. He said he wasn't, and the White House had to put out a statement saying he was. Today, a source tells MS Now the U.S. delegation does plan to leave soon. They did not, however, specify who was in the delegation. What is that supposed to tell us about the administration's approach to these talks if we don't even know who's going to be in the room?
Well, I can say that there have certainly been mixed messages from the very beginning from the administration about this war and directly from President Trump about the war. But regarding who's going to be in the room, that is one question I asked the president in our phone call today. And he said J.D. Vance and the other negotiators would be leaving later today or later this evening. So he indicated again that it would be his vice president and that along with J.D. Vance, there would also be the other top two negotiators who were there last time, and those are his envoys, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff.
So, Max, the president just yesterday reverted back to, I guess, what we would call his maximalist threats. I want to read what he wrote on Truth Social, quote, "We're offering a very fair and reasonable deal, and I hope they take it, because if they don't, the United States is going to knock out every single power plant and every single bridge in Iran. No more Mr. Nice Guy." So once again, he's threatening to commit what are arguably war crimes. What the Wall Street Journal article makes clear is that many similar posts are just Trump improvising, not actually writing about some sort of strategic plan. So if you're improvising, and I guess maybe he feels that worked for him when he was a real estate developer, what does that portend for these talks?
Well, I think the way the Iranians are reading it is that Trump is desperate for a deal, and he is, he's bloviating, he's beating his chest, he's making threats, but those threats have decreasing credibility because he's made these threats before and he hasn't carried them out. And again, I think it kind of reeks of desperation. And the reason why, so far at least, he has not carried out his threats to target Iranian power plants and infrastructure is not because he's a nice guy. I don't think anybody would mistake him for a nice guy. The reason is because Iran has very clearly communicated that it would retaliate by targeting energy infrastructure throughout the Gulf. And that could make the current energy crisis, which is already the worst on record, far, far worse. And that would have devastating effects for the global economy and for the U.S. economy. And so I think it's pretty obvious to everybody that Trump wants a way out of this war. He doesn't want to escalate the conflict. And his threats to escalate are really just a sign of his desperation to end it and to try to get a deal with the Iranians. But he's finding that very hard to do because the Iranians feel like as long as they control the Strait of Hormuz, they have the upper hand.
So, Laura, I think Jeff obviously got a couple of really good pieces of information out of the president in their phone conversation. One, J.D. Vance is going, and two, he says he's not going to be rushed into making what he calls a bad deal. We've got all the time in the world. What else are you hearing from the White House?
Yeah, right now, well, it is still, even though Jeff was able to get from the president that J.D. Vance is going, it is a lot of confusion, conflicting information, and not really straight answers from different parts of this administration and different parts of this White House. In the morning, the president told New York Post that Vance was already on his way, along with the two other chief negotiators, Witkoff and Kushner. But then we all came to realize that the vice president had not necessarily left yet, and the White House formally won't even say officially whether or not Vance is fully leading that negotiation. Now, of course, the president continues to say that he is, after over the weekend saying he wouldn't be. So there's all of this conflicting information, which is frankly stunning, given our past coverage of prior White Houses, which I know Jeff can speak to as well. And when it comes to the president, you've seen his frustration play out in his Truth Social post when he this morning was clearly frustrated by headlines and polling. And again, to Max's point, when it comes to the fact that the president would like to see this wrapped up, comparing it to Venezuela over and over again in what he views as the ideal way for an operation like this to be carried out. But of course, this is very different. It is a war, and the president, right now, there appears to be very little end in sight, despite the fact that the negotiators appear to be heading to Islamabad as early as this evening, if not tomorrow. And again, it is unclear whether or not Iran is fully going to be at this table, even though it would be a short flight for them if they decided to show up to Islamabad, Chris.
So, Jeff, I noted that the president's approval ratings in the middle of all this have fallen to their lowest level of his second term. There's a line in that Wall Street Journal article that speaks to it. It says, quote, Trump's top aides have taken turns telling the president that he should limit the impromptu interviews because they were only convincing the public that he had contradictory messages about the war. So here we are, 51 days into the war. I wonder if you're hearing a level of frustration from folks who work inside the White House. But is there anybody who really thinks that a president who has always trusted his gut and said it was his gut, essentially, that got us into this war, is about to change now because somebody suggests to him, maybe you shouldn't talk so much?
I think the last piece of the last part of what you just said, Chris, is spot on. I'll never forget one of the things that he said in an interview as a presidential candidate in 2016 when he was asked who he listened to. He said he listened to himself, essentially that he was his top advisor. And that was true throughout his first term. It's been true throughout the first part of his second term. He is his own spokesperson. He is his own chief of staff, and he gets his message out in any way that he wants to. And often that message is contradictory. Of course, he has advisors. Of course, he has an actual chief of staff and an actual press secretary. But he said to me on the phone this morning when I called that he enjoys the fact that we can have, or that he can have, this direct back and forth with people, which is not something that a more traditional White House with spokespeople who speak all the time for the president would have. This is an untraditional president. This is someone who follows his instinct, as you rightly said, and that is having an impact on all of the policies that he pursues, including this war.